Imagine being 15, all dressed up in heavy silk, thinking you're headed to a wedding, but instead, you find yourself locked away in a chamber inside the imperial palace. The doors slam shut, not for privacy, but for control, and you feel it right away every move. Every glance, every tiny reaction is being watched, recorded, and judged. Around you are women attendants, instructors, witnesses silent and unblinking, all trained to observe and assess. A court physician stands close by, ready to document everything, a living record of every little thing that happens. You were told this was tradition, a ceremony, but no one mentioned that the months of enforced silence and endless lessons in obedience were just prep for this moment, a transformation that would wipe away your identity. That morning, your mom's face was a mask of control, her hands brushing your hair, avoiding your eyes. It wasn't indifference. It was sorrow, a deep understanding that meeting your gaze would be too painful. This ceremony isn't about love or celebration, it's about absolute obedience. Turning a girl into a living tool of the empire, a way to wield political power, build alliances, and enforce loyalty. What you're about to go through, the rituals, the scrutiny, the strict discipline isn't just some cruel act. It's a system that's been refined over centuries, so complex that even the toughest observer would find it brutal. For over 600 years, the Ottoman Empire balanced luxury, political power, and psychological control. Within this balance, the Sultan's daughters lived a tightly constrained life, surrounded by beauty and knowledge, yet stripped of any real freedom. Their lives were dictated by the needs of the state, their potential bound by invisible chains. The palace, especially Topkapi, with its stunning walls, lush gardens, and winding corridors, seems like a dream. But behind every beautiful surface is a calculated system of control. The harem, often seen in movies as a place of romance, was really a hub of political strategy and hierarchy. Inside, hundreds of women from concubines to princesses lived under constant watch. Every breath, every word, every little move was analyzed, each one a potential path to either advancement or downfall. The concubines, many of whom were Christian captives from Europe or bought from North African markets, entered with their identities stripped away. Ironically, many had more chances to influence their fate and some freedom than the royal daughters, whose lives were completely bound by protocol. Fatma Sultan, born in 1606, to Sultan Ahmed I and his consort, Korsum became the embodiment of this paradox. Brilliant, intelligent, curious, and disciplined yet. Ultimately trapped by the empire's needs, her extraordinary talents rendered useless by the political machine she was born into. She grew up in a world filled with scholars, gardens, and manuscripts in Arabic and Persian. Was praised for her intellect and discipline. Her education was vast. She studied astronomy, calligraphy, history, and spoke multiple languages fluently, often debating with learned men, her curiosity sometimes unsettling her teachers. But none of this mattered. The empire had already mapped out her future. She would marry when the state required, not when she wanted, and her body, voice, and actions would serve the empire's diplomatic needs. Marriage for a princess was never about love. It was about consolidation, obedience, and showing off imperial power. The man chosen for Fatma was Kara Mustafa Pasha, a seasoned commander nearly 20 years older than her. Hardened by years of military campaigns and deeply entrenched in the workings of the empire, for him, marriage meant climbing the ranks, getting closer to power, and securing a spot in the Sultan's inner circle. But for Fatma, it meant becoming a living symbol of the empire's authority. Her life, desires, and identity subordinate to the political calculations of the court. In preparation for her wedding, she would undergo the Turvil and Mubarak. Rituals meant not to educate but to condition, under the watchful eye of Gulnar Hatton. A woman with decades of experience preparing princesses, Fatma's days became a relentless cycle of observation, correction, and repetition. She practiced every posture, every bow, every movement, until her body learned to submit. 18 different types of bows, each with a specific purpose, were drilled into her, her head bowed at precise angles, hands always below her heart. Her speech was limited to 43 approved words, carefully crafted expressions of submission. Any slip-up, hesitation, or wrong tone brought punishment, fasting, isolation, or public humiliation. Even her mother was involved in evaluating her, presiding over tests of her compliance. The goal of this conditioning was total: to erase the girl she once was, to replace her intellect and curiosity with blind obedience, to prepare her not just to obey her husband, but to embody the political authority and expectations of the empire. Beyond posture and speech, the princess was trained in endurance and psychological discipline. Exercises to exhaust her body, periods of fasting, confinement in isolated cells, and repetitive drills ensured that resistance wouldn't survive. Mental conditioning included memorizing Persian and Ottoman texts on marital obedience, reciting prayers crafted by the empire's scholars, and serving her father's favored concubines, all aimed at crushing pride, instilling humility, and reinforcing hierarchy. Fatma's personal agency, once expressed through study and curiosity, was slowly replaced by reflexive compliance. She learned that every thought could be monitored, every glance scrutinized, every hesitation recorded. By the time her wedding day arrived, she was no longer the girl who studied the stars or debated scholars. She had become a figure of ritualized obedience, a carefully constructed symbol of the empire's reach and control. Her world, though outwardly beautiful and luxurious, had transformed into a stage of psychological discipline where everything, the carpets, tapestries, mirrors, and daily objects, was meant to teach her that her body, her voice, and ultimately her identity were not her own. As the wedding drew near, Istanbul buzzed with ceremonial excitement. Streets overflowed with processions, incense, music, and performances, showcasing the empire's wealth and order for all to see. Inside Topkapi, banquets were set with gold and silver tableware. Musicians played, and dancers from far-off lands entertained the court. To outsiders, it looked like a celebration of abundance and joy. But beneath it all, the princess remained silent, her spirit crushed by months of conditioning. Court physicians kept a close eye on her, noting signs of anxiety, tremors, cold sweats, loss of appetite, and breathlessness. While the world outside reveled, she faced the culmination of a meticulously orchestrated psychological and physical regimen, designed to make her compliant, to extinguish her curiosity, and to align her mind and body with the empire's needs. When she finally entered the private nuptial pavilion, built according to ancestral designs, every detail was calculated to enforce control. The architecture itself was a tool of authority, octagonal chambers leading through levels of purification. Presentation and consummation, each meant to shape and condition her. Every movement reinforcing the hierarchy she had been trained to accept. Ritual baths prepared her body, perfumed oils and herbal elixirs calmed her, and garments woven with gold thread and pearls restricted her movement, constantly reminding her that escape or rebellion was impossible. Observers were present, trained to judge her compliance, while her husband's preparation focused on domination, strategy, and authority. Through these careful measures, the empire ensured that Fatma's mind, body, and spirit would conform entirely to expectations. Months of education and curiosity had been replaced with a single goal: total obedience, ready to function as the living seal of imperial policy. Fatma Sultan's story, while specific in its details, reflects a broader truth about the power dynamics in the Ottoman Empire. The system, honed over centuries, relied on psychological, ritual, and social tools to maintain authority and reinforce hierarchy. Through observation, repetition, and controlled conditioning, the daughters of sultans were taught obedience at the expense of their personal agency. Their brilliance and education mattered less than their ability to serve the empire's political needs. Within the harem, luxury and restriction were intertwined. Opulence came hand in hand with surveillance, discipline, and hierarchy. Princesses existed as living embodiments of statecraft, human symbols through which the empire exerted control over its own, even at the highest levels of power. Fatma Sultan's experiences reveal the complex interplay of authority, ritual, psychology, and politics, illustrating a system where power required the subjugation of even the most privileged and educated daughters of the empire. Her story is both a personal tragedy and a lens into the hidden structures of imperial rule, a testament to the cost of absolute authority and the human toll of a meticulously ordered system. After the formal preparations kicked off, time inside the palace felt totally different for Fatma Sultan. Days didn't just flow from morning to night anymore. It got split into rigid segments filled with instruction, discipline, and observation, all aimed at driving home the lesson that her life was no longer her own. The harem turned into more than just a home. It became a living institution, where hierarchy was enforced through rituals and routines. Every attendant who entered her space was both a witness and a judge, trained to spot even the tiniest slip-up. Silence wasn't just encouraged, it was mandatory. Words were limited, gestures restricted, and expressions flattened into blandness. Fatma quickly learned that obedience wasn't just about following orders, it was about anticipating them. She had to reshape her instincts so completely that submission became second nature. This internal control was the real goal of her training. By the time a correction was made, she was expected to already know she'd messed up. The empire didn't need to discipline her constantly. She started to discipline herself, which was a much more effective and lasting form of control. Within the harem, hierarchy ruled every interaction. Senior women walked through the corridors with unquestioned authority, while younger attendants lowered their gazes and stepped aside. Despite her royal blood, Fatma was placed deliberately low in this structure. She had to serve women whose status came not from birth, but from their closeness to power. This twist was intentional, meant to teach her that blood alone didn't grant freedom, and that rank could shift based on the empire's whims. Each act of service was ceremonial, performed under watchful eyes, followed by evaluations. The humiliation wasn't loud or dramatic. It was quiet, methodical, and relentless. Over time, the impact piled up. Pride didn't crumble in a single moment. It wore down gradually, until submission felt inevitable. Fatma's earlier education, once a badge of honor, became a burden. Intelligence let her see exactly what was happening to her, but it didn't offer any way out. The training expanded beyond just physical discipline. It seeped into her thoughts. Fatma learned that even her inner world was subject to judgment. Practices that were once about spiritual reflection were twisted to promote constant self-surveillance. She was taught to examine her thoughts for any signs of resistance, doubt, or longing, and to correct them before they could show on the outside. This way, the palace reached beyond her visible body and into her mind. Over time, the line between her own thoughts and the expectations placed on her blurred. What started as forced compliance slowly morphed into a conditioned reflex. The princess learned when to lower her eyes, how long to pause before responding, and how to completely still her expression. Emotion became risky, curiosity became a fault, even memory became suspect. Because remembering who she had been risked awakening desires the empire couldn't allow. As the wedding day approached, isolation deepened. Fatma was moved away from familiar spaces and faces into a secluded pavilion meant for brides of the dynasty. The design of this space reflected its purpose, closed off, inward-facing, and stripped of distractions. Sounds from the outside world faded, reinforcing the idea that the empire beyond the walls didn't exist for her anymore. Her days were now ruled by a strict schedule of meals, baths, and rest, all supervised and recorded. Food was chosen for its symbolic and physical effects, meant to nourish her body while softening her resistance. Baths became rituals, complete with scents and routines that blurred the line between care and control. Even rest was regulated, with attendants ensuring that her posture, position, and timing matched the rules. Nothing was left to chance. Every part of her environment served the same purpose, preparing her through submission. Meanwhile, outside her secluded world, the empire was gearing up for a spectacle. The upcoming wedding wasn't just a personal event. It was a public display of political order. Artisans, musicians, and officials worked hard to ensure that every visible detail screamed harmony, prosperity, and strength. Processions were planned, gifts gathered, and ceremonies rehearsed. For the people of Istanbul, the marriage of a princess symbolized continuity and stability, proof that the empire was still divinely ordered and unshaken. This contrast between public celebration and private discipline wasn't by accident. It reflected a core principle of imperial rule. Power must appear kind and grand, even while it imposes strict control behind closed doors. Fatma's role was to embody this illusion, to show serenity and dignity no matter the toll on her inner life. By the final days leading up to the ceremony, the transformation was almost complete. Observers noted the change. Her movements were precise but subdued, her voice rarely heard, and her expression so composed it seemed empty. The girl who once asked questions and explored ideas now responded only when necessary, and even then with careful restraint. To her instructors, this was a win. The training had achieved its goal. Fatma Sultan was no longer seen as an individual, but as a finished product, ready to fulfill her role in the imperial system. What remained unspoken, yet deeply understood by everyone involved, was that this obedience came at a steep price. The empire had secured loyalty and order, but in doing so, it had snuffed out something irreplaceable. As the wedding day loomed closer, the final phase of this transformation awaited her. One that would seal her fate not just in public records, but in her very memory. The day of the wedding finally rolled around, but for Fatma Sultan, it felt less like a celebration and more like a long-expected event she had rehearsed for ages. By then, anticipation had lost its spark. It was just a series of actions she had been trained to perform. From the crack of dawn, the palace buzzed with activity. Courtyards filled up with attendants, musicians practiced their tunes, and messengers darted through the halls, delivering orders sealed with authority. The empire was gearing up to show off its grandeur, while Fatma was tucked away in the bridal pavilion, going through her final preparations. Every step she took was calculated, Every gesture was scrutinized. The ritual baths marked her shift from daughter to wife, not a personal transformation, but a ceremonial passage defined by strict protocol. Warm water, scented with rare oils, flowed over her skin, while attendants guided her movements, making sure she followed every rule, even in moments meant to feel nurturing. It was neither comforting nor harsh. It felt distant, procedural, and absolute. Reinforcing the lesson she had learned, her body was no longer hers, but a vessel shaped by tradition and expectation. After her purification, she slipped into garments designed for symbolism and restraint. Layers of silk and gold thread told the story of the empire: purity, prosperity, continuity. Hidden fastenings restricted her movement. Heavy adornments controlled her posture, and her shoes limited the length and speed of her steps. To anyone watching, she looked regal and composed. But really, the clothing was just another way to enforce discipline, ensuring her very presence communicated submission. Mirrors lined the chamber, forcing her to confront her reflection repeatedly, a silent reminder of the role she was expected to play. Attendants adjusted her posture, corrected the angle of her head, and made sure her expression stayed neutral. There was no room for fear or resistance. If she felt anything at all, it had to stay hidden. Outside the pavilion, Istanbul transformed into a vibrant stage of celebration. Streets overflowed with processions, incense wafted through public squares, and music echoed through the markets and courtyards. For the people, the marriage of a princess symbolized order and divine favor, a sign that the empire was stable and thriving. Few consider the price of such grand displays. Inside the palace, banquets were spread out on tables of gold and silver. Dignitaries gathered beneath soaring ceilings, and performances from across the empire entertained the guests. Chroniclers recorded every detail of the splendor, praising the Sultan's generosity and the magnificence of the occasion. Fatma, escorted through these halls, moved quietly among the festivities, her presence more symbolic than participatory. She didn't speak unless someone addressed her. She only ate what was absolutely necessary. Court physicians watched her closely, noting signs of strain beneath her calm facade, but no one thought intervention was needed. The ceremony was unfolding just as planned. As evening approached, and public celebrations shifted to private rituals, Fatma was led deeper into the palace gardens toward the nuptial pavilion. This structure reflected centuries of imperial tradition, guiding the bride through a series of symbolic thresholds. Each chamber represented a stage of transition, reinforcing the narrative of surrender and duty. Attendants accompanied her through these spaces, performing set actions and reciting ceremonial phrases. At every turn, she was reminded through architecture, ritual, and silence that she was moving toward a role defined not by personal desire but by imperial necessity. There was no chance to pause, no invitation to reflect. The momentum itself became a form of control, pushing her forward through action she couldn't interrupt. In these final chambers, observers ensured every detail met expectations. The atmosphere was carefully controlled: dim lighting, muted sounds, slow and deliberate movements. The goal wasn't cruelty, but certainty. The empire wouldn't tolerate unpredictability, especially in matters tied to authority and lineage. Fatma's job was to complete the ritual without a hitch, to embody the ideals instilled in her through months of preparation. By this point, resisting didn't even feel like a choice. She followed orders because she had been trained to do so, because straying from the path felt impossible. Years later, those who chronicled the event would describe the wedding as flawless. The rituals were executed to perfection, the symbolism intact, the union confirmed. But what these accounts left out was the personal cost of such perfection. As Fatma Sultan emerged from the ceremony, changed in ways that couldn't be measured by protocol or captured in official records. The discipline that had shaped her behavior now extended inward, quieting her thoughts and emotions. The girl who once engaged with the world through curiosity and intellect had retreated behind layers of practiced composure. What remained was a figure who played her role flawlessly, even as something essential had been set aside. The empire got what it needed: continuity, order, and control. And in doing so, it showed that the greatest sacrifices often happen not on battlefields, but within the silent chambers of power. In the days after the wedding, Fatma Sultan found herself settling into a new routine that looked stable and dignified on the outside. But inside, she was carrying a heavy burden of what had been forced upon her. The palace quickly fell back into its usual rhythms, almost as if the wedding was just another chore ticked off a to-do list. For the empire, the marriage served its purpose, alliances were secured. Loyalty was reaffirmed, and everything continued as it should. But for Fatma, jumping into married life didn't bring any relief or closure. Instead, It only deepened the silence that had already taken root within her. At first, those close to her noticed small changes. She spoke less, unless someone addressed her, wore a calm expression that felt almost absent, and pulled away from the intellectual pursuits that once filled her days. Her books sat unopened, her instruments gathered dust, the gardens she used to explore with wonder became places she no longer visited. Her days turned into a predictable routine, structured around duty rather than passion or interest. The court physicians were among the few who could see these changes, though even they had to tread lightly. They noted her symptoms in bland terms: fatigue, loss of appetite, irregular sleep, and emotional withdrawal. These were not new within the palace. They were often brushed off as typical reactions to major life changes, especially for women of royal blood who faced extraordinary pressures. Treatments were suggested: herbal teas, scheduled rest, music therapy, and spiritual exercises meant to restore balance. But none of these tackled the real issue. The palace didn't have the words for losing oneself, nor did it recognize the psychological toll that came from rigid obedience. If it couldn't be named, it couldn't be questioned, and if it couldn't be questioned, it couldn't be changed. Fatma's marriage, now formalized and celebrated, became more of a mechanical arrangement. She made appearances when needed, fulfilled her duties without deviation, and ensured lineage through having children. To the outside world, she looked like the perfect imperial wife, composed, reserved, and unwavering in her role. But behind the palace walls, intimacy faded into distance. Silence replaced conversation, and routine took over connection. Observers noted a lack of warmth rather than outright conflict. Quiet existence shaped more by obligation than by genuine life. Even her husband, a man used to commanding respect, seemed affected by the atmosphere of restraint. In later years, he often spent long stretches away on campaigns or withdrew into habits that hinted at unease rather than happiness. The marriage had met its political goals, but it hadn't created a true partnership. As time went on, Fatma became more of a bystander in the intellectual and cultural life of the court. Invitations dwindled, and engagements felt more formal than heartfelt. She attended ceremonies, sitting according to rank, her posture straight and her expression calm. Yet those who had known her before sensed the spark that once lit her up was missing. She was no longer consulted or encouraged to engage. The system that had shaped her obedience now reinforced her silence, rewarding predictability and discouraging any deviation from the norm. In this way, her compliance became both a requirement and a reason for her marginalization. She had played her role so well that nothing more was expected of her except to endure. Despite all this, glimpses of her former self occasionally shone through in subtle ways. A lingering look at the night sky, a moment of hesitation near a library door, or a quiet pause during recitations hinted at an inner life that hadn't completely vanished. These moments were fleeting and never acknowledged, quickly swallowed by the palace's daily grind. Any resistance she felt came not from outward defiance, but from an inward retreat. Survival meant adapting, learning to live within the constraints imposed by power. Fatma became a master at this art, just as she had learned the rituals of obedience, becoming skilled at blending into the background, fulfilling expectations without drawing attention. Years passed in this way, marked by births, ceremonies, and the slow buildup of memories. Official records continued to paint a picture of stability and order, while private memories, preserved only in fragments, told a different story, one of a life lived under the weight of unspoken loss. Fatma Sultan aged quietly within the palace walls, her existence reduced to mere function. When illness finally took her, the cause was recorded in terms that suited the court, stripped of any implication or inquiry. But for those who had seen her transformation, her death felt less like an ending and more like the final consequence of a system that demanded total submission. Her story, though rarely spoken, lingered as an unacknowledged testament to the human cost of empire, reminder that beneath the ceremonies and records lay lives shaped, constrained, and ultimately consumed by power. After Fatma Sultan passed away, the palace kept running like a well-oiled machine, just like it always had. Official notices went out, prayers were said, and court rituals were carried out with the same precision as ever. The reason for her death was noted in a way that left no room for questions or reflection. In the grand scheme of the empire, there was no space for public mourning that would dig deeper into meaning or responsibility. A princess had lived, done her duty, and then she was gone. The system worked as it was supposed to. But for those in the palace who had seen her grow from a talented child into a quiet figure of protocol, her absence felt heavy. It wasn't just about losing a person. It was a quiet reminder of a pattern that was well understood but rarely spoken about. Fatma Sultan's story wasn't unique. It was just one of many in a long, It's a hidden history of imperial daughters whose lives were shaped by obedience and consumed by the demands of power. Archives dug up years later reveal bits and pieces of similar tales, scattered throughout court records, private letters, and coded notes. Some princesses fell into long silences, others faced ongoing health issues, and a few vanished from the records altogether. Their names erased from later genealogies, as if their absence could wipe away the discomfort. These omissions weren't accidents. The empire, which was so meticulous in documenting victories, alliances, and succession, was just as careful in controlling memory. Anything that didn't fit the narrative of order and divine authority was softened, hidden, or quietly removed. Truth was replaced with euphemisms. Psychological struggles became melancholy. Withdrawal was labeled as piety. Suffering was brushed off as a weak constitution. Through language, the empire kept its image intact while hiding the costs. Yet even within the system, signs of resistance lingered. Some princesses turned to religious devotion, not as a sign of submission, but as a way to distance themselves from the pressures of court life. Others built secret networks, sharing warnings and support through trusted attendants. There are mentions of petitions quietly submitted, requests for separation, or refusals to remarry after losing a spouse each, a small attempt to reclaim some agency. These acts didn't usually change the power structure, but they showed that obedience wasn't absolute. Even in silence, awareness remained. Even in compliance, there were moments of quiet rebellion. The empire could control bodies and dictate behavior, but it couldn't completely snuff out the human desire for individuality. When we look at Fatma Sultan's life through this broader lens, it becomes more than just a personal tragedy. It reflects how absolute power works not just through force, but through rituals, education, and psychological manipulation. The Ottoman Empire wasn't alone in this. Throughout history, imperial courts from Europe to Asia used similar methods to secure loyalty and stability, often at the expense of those closest to the throne. Daughters became tools for alliances, symbols of continuity, and sacrifices made to maintain order. Their privilege protected them from material struggles, but didn't shield them from losing their choices. In many cases, it intensified the control over them because their lives mattered not as individual stories, but as pieces in a larger puzzle. The lasting legacy of these hidden lives challenges the romanticized images often associated with royal courts. Behind the grand architecture, ceremonies, splendor lay systems that demanded silence and conformity, especially from women whose worth was measured by their obedience rather than their thoughts. Fatma Sultan's intelligence, education, and curiosity weren't outliers. They were traits the empire nurtured and then stifled when they threatened prescribed roles. Her story pushes us to rethink what power protects and what it consumes. It reminds us that being close to authority doesn't guarantee freedom, and those most tightly bound to power are often the ones least able to escape its demands. Today, as historians sift through palace archives and rethink long-accepted narratives, voices that were once muted are starting to emerge. They don't shout loudly, and they aren't toppling empires, but they persist. Fatma Sultan's life, pieced together from fragments and silences, stands as one of those voices. It doesn't just ask for judgment, it seeks recognition that greatness, as recorded in chronicles and monuments, often rests on unseen sacrifices. Recognition that history's most carefully crafted images hide lives shaped by fear, obedience, and loss. And recognition that remembering these stories isn't about condemnation, but about honesty. Only by acknowledging what was hidden can we grasp the full human cost of empire, and only then can the voices long silenced finally begin to be heard. If you really enjoy this type of video, then hit the subscribe button and also like button. See you next time.